After getting married, I had booked a wedding ceremony, but Matthew cancelled it at the last minute, citing work reasons. Feeling indignant, I received a call from my husband's cousin Mia. She said my husband Matthew's name was on the list of clients getting married today. Skeptical, I rushed over and was stunned to see Matthew at the chapel, exchanging vows with an unfamiliar woman. The two of them moved to the main building to have their reception. From a slightly open door in the back room, I could overhear their conversation. "Ah, I wonder if Sophia's ceremony went well? If she showed up in that old lady dress, I bet there would be boos from the guests." Scary thought. "Matthew, you married her because you love her, right?" "No way. She's such a tasteless country bumpkin. My only love is you, Ava." Shaking with anger, I immediately called my dad. Soon after, Dad arrived with relatives in tow, and we stormed into the reception hall. "Please hurry, it's starting." "Just you wait. I'll send your blissful selves straight to hell in no time. I'm Sophia, a 42-year-old housewife. I recently married Matthew and now juggle a full-time job and being a housewife. Having lost my mom to illness in childhood, I was raised with care by my dad, who runs a real estate business. I grew up well-loved by relatives I'd meet at family events. Upon graduating college, I moved to town to live on my own, not wanting to be too dependent on Dad. However, as it's only an hour's drive to my parents' home, I visit easily during long holidays. I had been hoping to marry soon to bring Dad, now over 60, peace of mind. Right then, I met Matthew, who had come from headquarters to assist with work, and we hit it off. Matthew, a local, had a stylish and sophisticated air. He had a stylish manner, good at his job, and fun to talk to. Feeling charmed, I accepted his proposal to date with marriage in mind. Later, he proposed at a restaurant, and I joyfully accepted the engagement ring. Dad was overjoyed when I told him over the phone. It was decided to introduce Matthew to Dad. Little did I know of the turmoil that lay ahead. Dad greeted Matthew with a beaming smile. "Welcome. You're just as wonderful as my daughter said." "Thank you." The calm and friendly Dad, and the bright, talkative Matthew. Seeing them bond over sports, I felt relieved. They seemed to be getting along well. However, while leaving home in high spirits and heading back to town, I was taken aback by Matthew's words as he looked out the window. "There's really nothing around here. Can't believe you managed to live in such a place." With my hands on the wheel, I was at a loss for words. Indeed, this area is mostly orchards and houses. It must seem dull compared to the city where Matthew grew up. But I didn't want him to talk about it like that. I swallowed my complaint and forced a smile. "It's a peaceful landscape. The starry sky is beautiful, and it's quiet. There's even a supermarket and grocery store across the river." Ugh, thought it smelled. "There's a cow right there. The smell might stick to my clothes. Need to wash them as soon as we get back." Matthew continued in a mocking tone. "Your house is unnecessarily big, isn't it? A single-story typical country home. See, my family's place in the city has a small parking and yard. I'm envious. Is being from the city that great?" I felt disgruntled but didn't want to fight so early in our marriage. "It's just a typical city person's view," I told myself, suppressing my confusion. A month later, I was invited to Matthew's family home. As expected, it was in a corner of the city crammed with buildings and apartments. Matthew's parents, my in-laws, had a stylish air, but gave off a cold impression, just like their stylish 3-story house. They examined my face as if appraising me, making me uncomfortable. Hearing where my family lived from Matthew, my mother-in-law smiled mockingly. "Oh, that place was a village until recently, right?" "Yes." "You say your mom died of an illness? Only one parent, huh? Well, it's better than them being divorced, I guess. Does that mean they would have opposed our marriage if my parents were divorced?" I felt uneasy at such outdated thinking. Sophia's family might be in the countryside, but they're big landowners. Her dad owns a real estate company. Matthew's words made my in-laws lean forward. Big landowners? Company president? Everyone in the neighborhood, it seems, is on Sophia's family land. Oh really? That's impressive. The in-laws exchanged looks and laughed with a sarcastic smile. Please take good care of Matthew, Sophia. Yes. I responded with a forced smile to the suddenly friendly in-laws. As we drove back, Matthew, gripping the steering wheel, boasted. My dad works at a major automobile company, as a department head at the headquarters. And my mom is a housewife. She doesn't need to work outside. Wow, that's great. I praised him, but felt a bit disappointed as Matthew talked about his parents' achievements as if they were his own. Nevertheless, my affection for Matthew hadn't cooled. After a dinner with both families, we got married. A garden wedding, a chapel, an elegant ceremony at a traditional hotel. Unable to decide, I chose to look for a wedding venue leisurely after registering our marriage. Matthew was understanding, so I took my time, gathering information from wedding magazines, the internet, and married friends. Finally, leaning towards a garden wedding, I brought it up with Matthew, who, for some reason, vehemently opposed it. I want to have it at a chapel. We'll have the ceremony there and the reception in the main building on the grounds. Eh? Didn't you say you'd leave it up to me? Well, that's... I changed my mind after talking to someone I know. Matthew was oddly evasive. Confused, he showed me a promotional video on his mobile phone. Look, isn't this place nice? In a hall adorned with colorful flowers, the bride and groom smiled happily. Indeed, it's lovely, but... All right, it's decided. Let's have it here. Matthew quickly called the venue and booked a tour. At the tour, Matthew listened intently to the details about the ceremony and reception, asking the staff numerous questions, to my surprise and delight. He's usually indifferent to events, but he seemed genuinely interested. His enthusiasm for our wedding warmed my heart. However, his proactive approach lasted only until the site visit. When it came to important details like choosing attire, buying wedding rings, and planning the ceremony, Matthew lost interest, citing a busy work schedule. Choose whatever dress you like, Sophia. Everything suits you. His indifferent attitude left me disheartened. It's not about that. I want you to see them. You always dress stylishly, right? I rely on your good taste. Thanks. But I want to keep it a surprise for the day. It's normal for the husband to accompany, isn't it? At my words, Matthew became sullen. I can't help it, I have business trips on weekends. Complain to my colleagues, please. Blaming his busyness only soured his mood further. I've already finished the guest list and sent the invitations, isn't that enough? I've ordered the rings I showed you on my mobile phone too, and I'll pick them up soon. His obviously reluctant response saddened me, but I didn't want to argue further and held back my complaints. Make sure you come to the next meeting. We should choose the gifts for the guests together. I know. I'll definitely come next time. Matthew responded with a frown, seemingly annoyed. My anxiety grew with his reply. True to form, he broke his promise again. On the day of the meeting, he said he'd come after work, but he didn't show up at the appointed time. My calls went unanswered. My messages unread. After waiting 15 minutes past the scheduled time with no sign of him, I apologized to the female staff. I'm sorry. I can't get in touch with my husband, so please proceed with the meeting. Understood. You're Sophia, right? The staff called out to me as I hung my head. Yes, that's me. Don't you remember? I'm Mia, Matthew's cousin. We met at my mother's 17th death anniversary. Oh, Mia! I exclaimed as the memory came back to me. Indeed, I had attended the funeral with Matthew soon after our marriage. Arriving early and surrounded by strangers, I felt nervous. But Matthew left me alone and went to chat with his cousins. Then Mia, about my age, approached me with a smile, making me feel relieved. Surrounded by my husband's relatives, I felt like I was saved by being able to talk to someone who was around the same age as me. Mia, I see you work here. Yes, I do. I'm so happy you're having your wedding here. Mia beamed with a friendly smile, then suddenly lowered her voice. Is Matthew really that busy with work? He wasn't so busy when we were dating. I understand work is important, but I honestly wish he'd prioritize us a bit more. I confided in a lowered voice, and Mia comforted me. It's a big event, after all. Next time I see him, I'll tell him straight. Thank you. I felt a bit lighter as Mia clenched her fist in resolve. When I got home, Matthew was sprawled on the sofa, fiddling with his mobile phone, wearing a smug smile. Even as I entered the living room, he didn't even say, "Welcome back." Hey, don't you have something to say to me? I stood in front of Matthew and spoke in an angry tone. Finally looking up, Matthew replied, Sorry. I was supposed to finish by noon, but I had to work overtime. Then at least send a message. Besides, it's not your busy season, is it? Matthew frowned at my question. Look, Sophia, the department where you work is different from the headquarters. It's busy. A laid-back country girl like you wouldn't understand. What does my hometown have to do with anything? To be honest, I don't even want to have a wedding. It's just a hassle. I was at a loss for words. Matthew thought of our wedding, the first step towards our future together, in such a way. Fine, from now on, I'll decide everything myself. And you don't get to complain. I retorted strongly, tears spilling over. Can I really make it work with Matthew? Matthew panicked at the sight of me crying. Sorry, I went too far. I'm just tired from the busy work and the hassle of preparing for the wedding. I promised to attend the last 2 meetings. His frantic words made me skeptical. Really? Can I trust you? Yeah. If work comes up, I'll reschedule it for the next day or talk to a colleague about it. And Matthew did keep his promise, attending the remaining meetings with me. Yet another worrying incident occurred. A month before the wedding, Matthew suddenly wanted to postpone it due to a work-related issue. When I pressed for details, he explained, Sorry. A colleague made a mistake, and there's a defect in a product. I have to go on a business trip to a subsidiary that day. I couldn't hold back my anger. Stop being so ridiculous. Can't someone else cover for you? It's our wedding. It's my responsibility for my colleague's mistake. I have to apologize in person. I understood his words as a working professional. I felt like crying, but there was no use blaming Matthew, so I gave up and asked him a question. How long will you postpone it? Until the issue is resolved. Once things settle down, we'll book again. I'll write the apology letters, of course. I held back my complaints. I just wanted to prioritize our wedding. All right then, please do that. I sighed and agreed. Sometime later, the day before the originally scheduled wedding arrived. Matthew left for his business trip as planned. As I was getting ready to go out, my mobile phone rang. It was Mia. Her words left me shocked. What? Just see for yourself. I rushed out of the house. Arriving at the wedding venue by car, I checked the names of people who had a wedding that day at the entrance of the main building. It's true. The groom, Matthew. The board listed Matthew and an unfamiliar woman's name. And today was supposed to be the day before our wedding. Feeling dizzy, I headed to the chapel on the north side of the main building. With a prayerful heart, I pushed open the heavy doors and gasped in shock. Matthew, in a white tuxedo, was facing a woman in a wedding dress, standing before a pastor. Matthew lifted the woman's veil and they exchanged a kiss. I felt like collapsing. I was stunned, but as I watched the happy couple, a surge of intense anger welled up inside me. His excuses of being busy for our wedding preparations, the sudden postponement, it was all for this woman. The two of them left the church and walked to the main building for the reception, stepping on the petals laid out by the guests. The guests seemed to be in their 30s and 40s. Matthew and Ava had not invited colleagues or family, only friends. I followed the guests discreetly to the main building. Unable to contain my anger, I waited outside the dressing room to confront Matthew. When the staff left the room to answer a call, I decided to barge in. But as I reached for the doorknob, I heard their conversation through the slightly open door. Thinking it might be useful later, I slipped my mobile phone set to record into the gap. What did I tell you? Wedding dresses are for the young. I wonder if the wedding with Sophia will be okay. If she shows up in a dress at her old age, the guests might boo. Matthew, that's awful. You married her because you love her, right? No way. She's just a tasteless country girl, practically a charity case. You're the only one I love, Ava. Tell me more. Matthew and Ava's vulgar laughter made my blood boil. I clenched my fists so tightly it felt like my bones would break. Unforgivable. You'd better brace yourselves. I'm going to send you two, so full of happiness, straight to hell. Completely enraged, I moved to a corner of the corridor away from the dressing room, taking deep breaths to calm down. Fortunately, Dad and the relatives were nearby. I sent the recording of the conversation in the dressing room to Dad and watched his reaction. He was furious. I then called someone else, who also couldn't hide their surprise. While making these arrangements, the end of the hallway became noisy. The reception was about to start. I hung up the phone and headed towards the reception hall. After waiting outside for a while, Dad arrived as promised, with a large group in tow. I nodded to Dad and then pushed open the doors to the reception hall. Now, let's raise our glasses to wish the couple and both families prosperity and happiness. As the celebratory mood filled the air, I entered the hall with Dad and all our relatives. Please hurry, it's starting. Wait a minute. The guests began to murmur in confusion. Excuse me, who are you? You're not on the guest list. Could you please leave? To the perplexed host, I smiled sweetly. Who am I? I'm Matthew's wife. Matthew and Ava on the stage froze. Clearly, they hadn't informed the guests that Matthew was married. How strange. Why is my husband having a wedding with an unknown woman? Tell me, are you Matthew's mistress? I called out to Ava, who was frozen on the stage, with a big smile on my face. My husband's always in your care. I guess you knew he was married since you're not surprised to see me. So, you're an accomplice then? No, this is... Matthew fell silent with a pained expression, and Ava looked shaken as the hall erupted in murmurs. Wait, what's going on? Matthew isn't single? Bigamy is not okay. This is a joke, right? I'm leaving. Hey, everyone! Please return to your seats. No, this is ridiculous. I'm leaving too. I practiced to liven up the ceremony, and it was all a waste of time. The host put the microphone back on its stand and left the hall with the other guests, shoulders slumped in anger. Matthew, left staring at the empty hall with my dad and relatives, yelled at me. Sophia! You've ruined a perfectly good wedding. What are you going to do about this? I gestured to the relatives to be quiet and then spoke to Matthew. So Matthew, you had the money to have a wedding, huh? Ava looked at me with a mocking expression. What are you talking about? Matthew is a department head, he earns a lot, doesn't he? And you, his wife, don't even know that? Ava laughed scornfully and turned a naive smile to Matthew. Matthew went all out to plan something special for Ava, right? The hotel we're staying at tonight is the top floor suite. Ah. Matthew averted his gaze guiltily. I laughed and informed Ava. Don't you know? Huh? This man is drowning in debt. I explained calmly. I accidentally opened a card statement that came the other day. The amount on revolving payments was shockingly high. I was surprised. Ava stared at Matthew in disbelief. Matthew, looking grumpy, turned away from Ava. He's a high earner but spends more than he earns. Clothes, bags, watches, always buying, and they're all high-brand new releases. He's all about appearances and showing off. I showed Ava a copy of the card statement I had prepared, and she turned pale. No! I didn't know about this. Oh, so you, his mistress, don't even know that? I echoed her words back at her, and Ava clicked her tongue, glaring at Matthew. Why didn't you tell me? I have a repayment plan. I won't burden you. Matthew answered. I plan to divorce Sophia after making her pay off the debts and then marry Ava. I never intended to have a wedding with you ever. Matthew ranted at me. I married a dowdy country girl like you for money, but I can't do it anymore. Living with you is making me smell like the countryside. Your wife is going to pay off your debts? Of course not. I dismissed the idea, and Ava spoke to Matthew in a whiny tone. Matthew, you've already finalized the contract for that high-rise apartment we're moving into soon, right? The night view from the 30th floor must be so beautiful. You remember our promise to live together after returning from our honeymoon tour in Europe, right? I sighed and alternated my gaze between Ava and Matthew. Matthew had been acting guilty and restless since earlier, avoiding Ava's gaze. So, it looks like you haven't actually signed the contract for the high-rise apartment, have you? Huh? You're probably going to make up some excuse about the rooms being full to delay moving in together. You don't have the money, after all. Or maybe you plan to have Ava front the costs and then live there without ever paying her back. That's not true. I plan to pay her back someday. Someday, right. Ava's wide eyes narrowed. Well, it's okay. I'm not in a hurry to get repaid. That's right. Ava comes from a wealthy family, so she can afford it. I couldn't help but burst into laughter at that remark. Matthew looked at me annoyed as I shook with laughter. Why are you laughing? Matthew, you thought Ava was from a well-to-do family? Sure, she might have free access to money if her husband is working abroad. Matthew looked shocked. I informed Matthew with a hint of pity. Eh? Didn't you know? You wouldn't get much information about a receptionist at a client's company, would you? After blinking several times, Matthew turned to Ava. Ava has a husband? That can't be. She told me she was divorced and single now. Right, Ava? Ava didn't answer but looked away in another direction. I pulled out documents and photos from my bag and thrust them at Matthew. Actually, after I canceled the wedding plans, I hired a detective agency to investigate Matthew. What? Don't do stuff like that without permission. The person who cheated without permission has no right to complain. I'm using my own salary for this. Matthew fell silent, looking dissatisfied after my blunt statement. But our marriage is still new. Depending on your attitude, I was thinking of forgiving you. But I didn't expect you to have a wedding ceremony with your mistress. I glared sharply at Ava. And while I was at it, I had Ava investigated too. And then this, you wouldn't say he's your brother or friend, right? In front of a grand mansion, Ava is seen smiling warmly at a tall, handsome man. The man, with a suitcase at his feet, seems to be leaving for a business trip. The next photo shows Ava getting out of a car driven by the same man. The location is a garage with shutters at a house. The third photo is more decisive. Ava is walking cheerfully along a beautifully illuminated street, holding hands with the man. Matthew looks stunned, trembling. Ava, this guy is my cousin's brother. You only have female cousins. Oh? Did I say that? Ava snorts. Yes. That's my husband. Handsome, isn't he? Ignoring Matthew's gaping like a fish, Ava boasts. My husband is always traveling abroad, so I get bored. I thought it would be nice to find a moderately good-looking man to spend time with. Moderately? Yeah. You can't tell from the photo, but he's as handsome as a Korean idol. So, I don't want someone ugly to play with. They have to compliment me. Unconcerned with Matthew's dazed expression, Ava continues. Then Matthew showed up. I thought he'd be good enough. So, what about you marrying me after a divorce? Matthew looks close to tears. Huh? No way. Matthew's company is famous domestically, but nothing compared to overseas firms. Your salary is half of my husband's. Keep dreaming. Ava laughs. Today I just played along because Matthew wanted to play wedding. Play wedding? I was serious. Serious? When you're already married? Ridiculous. Ava cuts him off sharply. My in-laws' house is prestigious, and the Shinto ceremony was so plain and boring. Then Matthew suggested a chapel wedding, so I went along. It was fun, like filming a drama. After a satisfied smile, Ava pouts. It felt great to be the heroine, but having it ruined by the wife? So lame and disappointing. I'm bored now, let's break up. Ava! Bye-bye, don't contact me anymore. Wait, don't leave me! Leaving a teary-eyed Matthew behind, Ava flipped the hem of her wedding dress and left the venue. On stage, Matthew had his knees on the floor, overwhelmed, while my dad and relatives looked on with disdain. What a disgraceful man. I've never heard of someone canceling a wedding with his wife to marry another woman. Such dishonesty is beyond the pale. Hurting Sophia like this. Liar. Even as my relatives and cousins criticized him, Matthew showed no sign of remorse. Instead, he glared at me, Dad, and the relatives, shouting angrily. Shut up. Sophia, did you keep your dad and the relatives nearby just to make a fool out of me? You're twisted. Today is Mom's 33rd death anniversary. That's why the relatives were gathered. We had a meal at a nearby restaurant. Matthew looked puzzled. Didn't I tell you before? Oh, did you? You forgot because you were too preoccupied with the wedding. After my sarcastic comment, Matthew sulked in silence. I was supposed to join them. I was getting ready to leave when your cousin Mia told me someone with the same name as you was about to have a wedding ceremony. Mia? She works here? Yes. So I called Dad. I'm going to check it out. If it's true, I'll ask you and the uncles to come to the venue. And? Are you satisfied now? You ruined my important day. As I was about to respond, the sound of many footsteps approached. Turning around, Matthew was shocked and scared by the people entering the hall. Manager! The manager, seeing both Matthew and me, looked confused. Sophia called to say Matthew's wedding was happening, so I rushed over with colleagues. But what is all this? Well, that. When Matthew had worked at our company for a while, the manager had also come to visit, so the manager knew both of us. Because of that acquaintance, we had asked the manager to be our matchmaker. Manager, didn't I tell you? The head's wedding was supposed to be postponed. There was no new date set yet. The manager's colleagues frowned. The young man in the back nodded, his arms crossed. It was cancelled due to Sophia's circumstances with no new date decided, right? I was being blamed for it? Yes, but just now, we heard it was today, so we hurriedly prepared. I'm sorry for calling you suddenly when you're busy. I deeply apologized to the manager and a few colleagues. I won't be having a wedding with this person anymore. Of course not. Matthew snapped back in a harsh tone. I was a fool to marry someone like you. You've embarrassed me. That's my line, Matthew. The manager spoke sternly to Matthew. You brought shame upon me as your matchmaker. I didn't mean to. You were talented and admired by your colleagues. I had high hopes for you, so this is a disappointment. The manager stared coldly at Matthew. I'll report this incident to the president. Forget about any promotion. Just for an affair? Matthew's careless remark made the young colleagues show their disdain. Manager, having a wedding with a mistress is not sane. So that's who you are, Matthew. He should be dismissed from team leader too, right, manager? Let's ask someone else from now on. Indeed. The manager and colleagues bowed to me and left. Eh? I'm off the promotion track? No. Matthew collapsed on the stage, weeping, as my relatives voiced their disapproval. You brought this upon yourself. I knew you looked down on Sophia and me as country bumpkins. But I thought you were serious about your job and honest. Seems I was mistaken. Disappointing. Normally gentle, Dad spoke with anger to Matthew, who hung his head in confusion. The next day at work, Matthew was apparently met with disdain. Matthew is ungrateful, having asked the manager to be a matchmaker, then planning a wedding with his mistress and intending to divorce his wife. This scandal spread throughout the company and even reached clients. Despite previously topping his department's performance charts, Matthew lost the trust of his colleagues and clients, abruptly derailing his career advancement. Unable to bear the cold stares from those around him, Matthew left the company before being sent to a regional office. He had planned to trick me into paying off his debts, divorce me after clearing them, and then remarry Ava. But his convenient plan fell apart, leaving Matthew severely depressed. He sought sympathy from his parents, but my in-laws, informed by Mia of the reason for the divorce, were furious. What have you done? We're being talked about by all the relatives. Having a wedding with a mistress is not something a decent person does. We're cutting ties with you. Don't contact us anymore. This resulted in his estrangement from his own family. He was burdened with considerable debts from his fashion splurges, cancellation fees for our wedding, compensation to the venue for the ruckus at Ava's ceremony, and the payment for our divorce case. To repay these, Matthew had to take out more loans, which he ended up having to pay off all by himself. He tried to use his career experience to find a full-time job again, but due to his age, he was turned down everywhere, eventually settling for part-time work. To pay off his huge debts, he worked multiple part-time jobs from early morning till late at night, too busy to care about his appearance. When I saw him in town recently, he was gaunt, with an unkempt beard and noticeable gray hair, almost unrecognizable. Of course, I also claimed the payment for our divorce case through a lawyer from Ava. Ava, caught cheating by her husband, was immediately divorced and kicked out of her high-rise apartment. Like Matthew, Ava had to pay off the payment for the divorce case with her husband and me through a loan. Unlike the carefree lifestyle she had, she works desperately every day to make ends meet. Divorcing within a year of marriage. Initially, I blamed myself for that, but my colleagues were all understanding and supportive, not blaming me at all. Thanks to them, I was able to focus on work again. I am now enjoying a fulfilling life, taking on roles like new staff training and being selected for the planning and development team. I've also become close friends with Mia through this incident. We occasionally enjoy coffee or trips together. I realized that divorcing a man who easily lies was the right decision. I strongly hope to develop better judgment in people and continue growing personally.